Welcome back to the Vassy Kapelos Show on the iHeartRadio Talk Network.
It's 25 minutes before the top of the hour. Let's head over to Nova Scotia, where the PC government there, led by Premier Tim Houston, has introduced legislation that would have allowed the government, with about two-thirds support in the legislature, to fire the Auditor General, who acts as really a watchdog over government decisions and spending at every level of government right across the country. This week, the Premier walked back that part of the legislation after the AG themselves sounded an alarm, but other parts of the legislation, like giving government departments the ability to reject what are known as freedom of information requests if they find them trivial or frivolous, remain. That's still there. Claudia Chender is the leader of the province's opposition NDP. Hi, Ms. Chender. Great to have you on our program. Thank you very much for making the time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. A long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, we appreciate it. I wanted to start off on the subject of this legislation that had been introduced, and there's a couple of different facets to it. The first involved, and I talk about it in the introduction here, but the Auditor General and the role the government could have played in essentially being able to get rid of the Auditor General if enough of the House supported that call. The Premier has since, it seems, walked that back. Are you clear on whether or not the prospect of that still exists, or whether it's a done deal and that no longer will be going ahead?
All the messaging from that we've heard is that that part of the legislation has been scrapped, and Nova Scotians really made their voices heard. You know, when they went to the polls really recently here, they voted on the issues that were really, really clearly at the top of the polls: housing, healthcare, affordability. And we got into the legislative session, and suddenly we were talking about lack of accountability, being able to fire the Auditor General, interfering with the Information and Privacy Commissioner. So we and the government got a slew of terrible, terrible emails about that. And so they have made a commitment to walk that back. We certainly intend to hold them to it, as does the Office of the Auditor General. But there's a lot more going on in terms of their quest for secrecy, I guess. And so that's what's taking up our days in the House at the moment.
So I'll pick up on that point and ask specifically about the part of this that jumped out to me as a journalist. And it's all about, of course, freedom of information requests. This legislation would essentially allow the heads of government departments or agencies to refuse those requests if they determine that they're, quote, frivolous, vexatious, or really not specific enough. In layman's terms, for people who don't file these requests, why, in your view, is that problematic?
Well, again, what we've seen, particularly in the last few months, is a real move towards a lack of any accountability measures that exist here in the province. So the Office of the Auditor General is one, access to media is one, and oversight is another. So we already have pretty weak rules in this regard here in Nova Scotia. This government has spent $1 billion over budget the last 4 years. They don't have to account for it legally, which is really an absurdity. But the freedom of information piece is really important, Vassy, because just like they tried to give themselves the power to fire the Auditor General, they already have used their power to get rid of senior civil servants at will, more than any other government before them. So they've really cleaned house in those senior ranks. They've sent emails telling people that they can be problem solvers or problem stretchers. So the public service is really on notice. And what this does is it says public servants who serve at the pleasure of the Premier, really, can decide if freedom of information requests are vexatious or frivolous. And that's not to say those kind of requests don't come in. They do. And we absolutely think that the Information and Privacy Officer should have that power because she's an independent officer of the legislature. But to give that power to what are essentially political appointees is really dangerous because it means that people don't have access to information. And at the end of the day, to make good decisions, to hold our governments accountable, to understand how they're spending our money, we need that access.
So let me play devil's advocate for a second, because I've looked into what their rationale for this is. And we certainly have heard in other provinces and certainly other levels of government that the volume of these requests that come in is so cumbersome that they're not able to process them in a timely manner. And that's certainly one of the arguments that they've put forward, that this will essentially help with actual access to information, because they will no longer be as weighed down by the sort of less significant, cumbersome work that they are forced to do because of this. How would you respond to that?
I would say that for years, the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner, through multiple commissioners, have been asking for more resources from government to do their job. They've been asking for more funding, and they have been asking for more power themselves to identify claims that might be vexatious or frivolous or take up too much time, and to be able to deal with those appropriately. So I think there are lots of opportunities for this government to make that office more functional, more efficient, and be able to work more quickly. They chose the one that benefits them the most, and that has the greatest opportunity at obscuring the information they don't want known from the public, from the media, and from people who ask. And I think that's really in contravention of how we understand good government to work.
What about the argument that they have a mandate to do stuff like this, or really whatever agenda they want to pursue, given the size of their majority, the gains they made? And I know your party made some gains too, but the substantial gains that they made in the last election, which of course was just last year.
Well, I think that's really at the heart of this issue. What is their mandate? I think that when we went to the polls here in Nova Scotia, it was really clear what people were voting on. People were voting on affordability. People were voting on healthcare and attachment to primary care, which remains an enormous problem in this province, notwithstanding a first term of this government who said they were going to fix it. And they were voting on the housing crisis. It's remarkably, I mean, I think your listeners in Ontario would be staggered if they saw what the rental prices are here in Halifax. And so that is what people are voting for. That was the mandate. There was nothing in their election platform in any of the conversations they had, or to be honest, Vassy, in their first term. This is not the Tim Houston we've seen in 2025 is not the Tim Houston that we knew before. So he was elected as a capital P progressive conservative. He came out and, made a lot of choices that obviously I disagree with, but certainly in the area of healthcare, in the area of housing, connected to the platform he ran on, nothing that this government has done since they've been back in the legislature, from threatening the Auditor General to threatening the Freedom of Information and Privacy Commissioner, to actively soliciting donations from their members to, quote, bypass the media, is something that anyone in Nova Scotia got wind of prior to the last couple of weeks, and people are really upset about it. I don't think they have that mandate. I get emails every day from every corner of this province, mostly Tories, who are either copying me on an email to their MLA or writing and saying, this isn't what I voted for. Like, that is the predominant phase. This isn't what I expected. This isn't what I voted for. So they have a majority government, and they can and will do whatever it is that they want to do, because they have the power to do that. But I think it's really, really important that we let folks know what's happening here, and they're really trying to prevent that from being possible.
I think from what I've garnered, their argument to counter that is, this isn't necessarily about, reducing transparency. It's about increasing efficiency. Would that argument not, to some degree, resonate with the people who did support them?
I think that efficiency is a funny one, Vassy. So we're the only legislature in the country that doesn't have a calendar. So, you guys talk about Ottawa all the time, where the MPs are there all year, all through the spring, all through the fall. Here in Nova Scotia, we sit an average of about 25 days a year. We're never in the House because we don't have to be, and nobody will actually put in a legislative calendar. And now they're changing the rules of our legislature to limit debate so that they have closure and time allocation, so that when these bills go through, they can give us an hour to debate them. So I think the efficiency argument is really, really spurious. I actually think if you're just looking at efficiency in terms of time, we've probably got the most efficient system in the country, and it is not at all effective, and it doesn't serve the needs of Nova Scotians.
That's the leader of Nova Scotia's NDP, Claudia Chender. We'll take a very short break. On the other